Hey, tennis fans, you're listening to Matchpoint Canada, the official podcast of Tennis Canada. We're also members of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm Ben Lewis, joined alongside Mike McIntyre for our Roland-Garros recap episode. This one brought to you by Hotel X. And yeah, the 2 weeks in Paris, Mike, officially in the books. And I don't think we had any surprises on the women's side. Very compelling final on the men's side.
Absolutely. Although, to be honest, I think it was the two players we both picked to end up hoisting the
That's right.
trophies, but probably different paths to get there. On the men's side, I mean, Carlos had to go through some epic five-set matches, back-to-back semifinals and finals, which I don't think anyone had done since, oh God, going back like many, many years back to, I think it was like the 1930s or 40s, if I heard correctly. That incredible feat. And then on the women's side, Iga won, but had a real challenge early in the tournament that we talked about last week on our mid-tournament episode. And that came from Naomi Osaka, who played some terrific tennis on the clay to really show what she's capable of doing when she's firing on all cylinders. And after that, I mean, my goodness, was it ever smooth sailing for Iga, who just demolished her opponents, the 6-love double bagel against Potapova, and then taking out last year's Wimbledon winner, last year's US Open winner, and then a very routine scoreline against Paolini, the surprise finalist, to hoist her fourth French Open in the last 5 years. So it wasn't without any obstacles, but the obstacle came quite early for Iga.
Yeah, and look, I'll give myself another pat on the back because I felt like I sort of projected that after she did escape that match with Naomi Osaka, and she was incredibly close to losing that. She was down a match point. She was down 2-5 in the third set. We saw the moment when video cameras captured her in the locker room crying just from the emotional toll of that match, the roller coaster, maybe understanding and knowing you're such a heavy favorite to win this tournament and you were that close to losing it all in the second round to obviously an incredible champion in Osaka. And it felt like after that win for me, it was just a release and a relaxation for Iga Swiatek, and the ball was rolling. And once that train gets going on the clay courts in Paris, she is so hard to stop. You mentioned some of the score lines. I wanted to see that rematch of Coco Gauff against Iga Swiatek to see if Coco could kind of problem solve and find her way past Swiatek, but she still clearly has a ways to go there, particularly on the clay. And then we get a first-time finalist in Jasmine Paolini, who earlier in the tournament, we talked about her win over Bianca Andreescu. I certainly didn't foresee her taking this road all the way to the final. She's obviously enjoying this career season, but of course in the final, just outmatched and outclassed by Swiatek, who now just at the age of 23 is a career 35-2 at Roland-Garros. Just staggering.
Yeah, and first to speak about the Italian, I mean, first of all, Italian tennis fans must be feeling pretty darn good. They've now got the number one men's player in the world, and Paolini's up to a career high number seven in the world. And how remarkable for her to be achieving this at the age of 28. And we saw her earlier this year in Dubai capture a big title. Obviously quite comfortable on clay. But this tournament, to me, we thought, as we discussed heading in, that it was going to be not a lock that the top four were going to make it to the semis, but they had all been playing so well on the clay, and especially Sabalenka and Rybakina with, big results coming in, even though Iga had the, now three titles in a row, something that no one's done on the women's tour since Serena Williams. But I really thought that Sabalenka and Rybakina were going to be there. So big shout out to Mira Andreeva, who we both talked about in our initial Roland-Garros episode as someone to watch. And at the age of 17, she's now up to number 23 in the WTA standings, a career high for her, and what an immense talent that we've got in our hands with her. And Paolini didn't see that one coming either. Got to give Bianca credit to push her to three sets then, given that was the eventual finalist that would be there. But yeah, a little bit more surprising on the women's side, which just adds to the overall appeal and interest as the tournament goes through.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode of Matchpoint Canada. If you'd like to follow along every week, give us a like below. Hit the subscribe button as we're trying to make 15,000 subs. Check out the first episode of Tennis Nation, recapping Canada's historic Davis Cup win from 2022. Yeah, those quarterfinals, both of them were very interesting to see Paolini overcome Elena Rybakina, who we've talked about a lot this season, has obviously played some fantastic tennis. And I think if you maybe take out her results at the slams, not that a quarterfinal result is bad in Paris at all. It's a very good result, but maybe setting the standards higher for someone who's won Wimbledon and been to the finals of the Australian Open, thinking she was a contender to perhaps get to the final and have a shot against Iga. I'm sure she's disappointed to lose in the quarters, but I love seeing kind of players figure it out in latter stages of their career. And Paolini's been around for some time. You know, she's late 20s, I believe 29 years old. So she's not a new face to the tour, has been reliably kind of around the top 50. And we saw inroads from her last season. And now getting inside the top 10 is just an incredible result. I saw her play great tennis, obviously, in Dubai earlier this season. And I love how she's crafty. She's quick around the court. She's aggressive. And I think the most notable thing about her is she is one of the shortest players on tour. She's just 5'3", and packs a strong punch, and she's creative. And we saw that in spades, I think, in the win against Elena Rybakina. And then I felt like finally with Mira Andreeva, the 17-year-old, you felt like Paolini and a little bit more age experience, a bit better prepared or ready for the moment in that semifinal compared to Andreeva, who maybe got a little bit, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but not quite producing the same tennis that she had in her quarters against Sabalenka.
Understandable though, and it's interesting. The French Open has seen a lot of young women do incredibly well in recent years. We think back to Marketa Vondrousova a few years ago when she made the finals. Coco Gauff has played well there at a young age. I mean, Iga, look at how many she's got already, and she's just recently turned 23, I think. So, yeah, it begs the question also, where do we rank Iga Swiatek at this point in time in terms of the overall sort of landscape of women's tennis champions, Grand Slam champions in our generation? She's got a hell of a lot of time to go, still many years ahead of her. But even at this point, where would you place her in terms of the women's game?
Yeah, look, I already think she's well up there, and for me, she's obviously surpassed some of these names of, I don't want to say prior generation, but names we've been used to, and still kind of part of our generation that are slowly going. Garbina Muguruza, Simona Halep, Angie Kerber, Caroline Wozniacki. She's obviously posted better numbers than them, and they all had terrific Hall of Fame careers. A couple of them still obviously playing at this stage. To have 5 slams already at the age of 23, 4 on a single surface. I mean, to me, the success in Paris is a bit reminiscent of watching Justine Henin back in the day at Roland-Garros, and I think it's fitting. She's the first player to three-peat here, actually, since Henin did so, 2005, 2006, 2007. But even at this stage, you have to think like projecting the rest of her career, she's going to win a number of Grand Slams still. And I had this discussion with Steve Weisman on a Roland Garros preview. Chris Evert has that record of 7 French Open titles. He asked me point blank, do I think she's going to break that record? And that was when she had 3. And I said yes. So you look at that. If she's winning 8, 9 French Opens, maybe winning 4 or 5 elsewhere, we're talking about one of the greatest champions in the history of the game.
And you talk about Chris Evert, and Evert was before your time and before my time as well, to be perfectly honest. Really, I don't have any memories as a kid of watching her. She had already sort of retired by that point, but her numbers are staggering. So if we're talking about Iga in the same breath as Chris Evert, I mean, that's already quite the compliment. And Evert herself this week said that she thinks, I believe, that Iga will at some point match or surpass her French Open title. So many years ahead to see how it plays out.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely at this stage, she's established herself, just like on the men's side, which we'll get to in a moment. Carlos Alcaraz is already establishing himself as a young legend of the sport. If those two words can somehow go together, I feel like with Swiatek, the same applies.
Yeah, I agree. And now second most Grand Slams of all active players for Iga Swiatek, surpassing Naomi Osaka, for example, who has 4, and just behind Venus Williams, who has 7 and hasn't officially retired. Not that
True, yeah.
not that we expect her to add to that tally, but that was someone who was obviously incredibly dominant, a former world number 1, and collected a bunch of titles at Wimbledon. My question now with Iga. We'll talk maybe a little bit of grass court tennis as well as 10 women have completed what's called the Channel Slam in tennis history, which is winning the
Hold on, what's the Channel Slam? I'm not familiar with this term.
yeah, French Open and Wimbledon back to back in the same season.
Oh, that channel. Okay, got it.
That
Yeah.
channel. And Serena Williams, the last to do it in 2015. Would Iga Swiatek be someone who's ready to contend for a Channel Slam? Is she someone who we should now believe can take this clay dominance over to the grass court surface?
Yeah, what's her best record at Wimbledon to date? What's
I think she exited. It was Alize Cornet who beat her in the third round or round of 16 when she lost that 37 match winning streak. And I have to remind myself, I think I don't think she's been past the round of 16, but I
okay.
recall,
You go.
didn't she win the junior slam at the at Wimbledon? Sorry, she made quarterfinals last year. That's her best result. So quarters.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly difficult transition, and not just the surface change, but just maintaining that momentum for so long.
Yeah.
And it's not like she's just come from, the French Open and having a good run there. She's been on this crazy winning streak for weeks and weeks now. So it's a heck of a lot of tennis. How does she plan on playing this part of the season, not overloading herself too much, but also wanting to get some reps in on the surface? It's going to be quite tricky. But for tennis fans, I mean, I think this is my favorite time of year when you go from Roland-Garros to Wimbledon in just a matter of weeks. And then added bonus this year for tennis fans, we're going to get the Olympics as well, where we go back to the clay courts,
Yeah.
which is going to be is going to throw all those players for a bit of a loop. But it's just yeah, it's my favorite time of year, and grass court tennis, which we'll get to a little bit later in the episode. It just brings me back to being a kid again and falling in love with the sport. So very excited for what's to come. We'll get to the men's results from the French Open, but first, a quick word from our sponsors this week. Our thanks to Hotel X. And if you're looking for the perfect urban getaway for your next family vacation, then look no further than Hotel X Toronto, the city's premier urban resort. With its state-of-the-art fitness facility, 10XTO, and 4 indoor tennis courts, there's something for everyone in the family. But that's not all Hotel X has to offer, with luxurious amenities from the rooftop pool to the award-winning Guerlain Spa, from the 250-seat cinema to the 3-level Sky Bar. There's so much to see and do all under one roof. Whether you're visiting Toronto for business or pleasure, Hotel X is the perfect choice for families and individuals alike. Book your stay today at Toronto's only urban resort, Hotel X Toronto. Experience the extraordinary. And I should say one more thing, that 10XTO, the facility there, getting all 4 of their courts resurfaced in early July. So I can have a fresh new look for people who can head on over there.
Beautiful. And if we talk some men's tennis, we forecasted this one. We knew it was a wide open men's field in terms of contenders, and I think a pretty long list of contenders, something we were not used to at a French Open tournament, which has been, of course, largely dominated by Rafael Nadal with his 14 titles. But Carlos Alcaraz was the odds-on favorite, and he comes through, as you mentioned, semifinals, a 5-set victory over his great rival and now the new world number one, Jannik Sinner, and then defeats Alexander Zverev in a topsy-turvy up and down 5-set affair, which had a lot of peaks and valleys. It was a fascinating match. You kind of felt like neither of them were necessarily playing their best tennis at the same times. And you felt like Alcaraz had handle on things when he forged ahead in the third set, 5-2, gave that away. Zverev rallied, won that set 7-5, and suddenly has a 2-1 lead. But Alcaraz in crunch time in particular, I thought found his best tennis when he needed it and really turned on the jets with his athleticism in the fifth to overcome Zverev. And already 3 Grand Slams on 3 different majors.
And this guy only turned 21 like a month ago. So it's just like, yeah, quite incredible. I thought the final was highly entertaining, very enjoyable to me. It was, maybe not quite best case scenario, but it was up there in terms of 2 guys in their first Roland-Garros final. You never quite know what to expect, but it went 5 sets, and even the scoreline in the end there, 6-2, but it was a very close fifth set with Zverev continuing what he'd had all match, which was an absolute ton of breakpoint chances. I think 23 breakpoint chances in total in the match, and only converted on 6 of those 23. So great defense, or great, ability to capture those points back for Alcaraz, obviously, with his back up against the wall when he was serving, and for Zverev to put that much pressure on him. must have been really nice for Spanish tennis fans to get some measure of revenge against Zverev for knocking out their all-time favorite in Rafa, who Zverev took out in the opening round. Of course, a very unfortunate drawing of the players in that one,
Hmm.
and fitting to see maybe another Spaniard rising up and winning. And although Alcaraz and Nadal have many differences, what they do have in common is that incredible fighting spirit. And as Alcaraz said, being willing to suffer out there. And both of those players have always been willing to suffer in their careers. Alcaraz's shorter sample, but yeah, what we've seen from him is, like I said earlier, a legend of the sport at the age of 21 already, I feel like.
Yeah, it's just remarkable what he's able to do. And I think the fact that Alcaraz, he's such an all-court player with every shot in the books. And I thought this final was really tactical because you could see Alcaraz changing the heights on his backhand, mixing in higher spin, mixing in slice, drawing Zverev forward, pushing him back. It was kind of a tactical battle, and the conditions were a little windy, so it was difficult. Zverev was serving incredibly well at stretches, so Carlos really had to solve this one. He couldn't necessarily just hit through him. Zverev was playing pretty far back in the court, defends the court pretty well. So I just the ability to do that at the age of 21, as you said, and Zverev now 0-2 in Grand Slam finals. Alcaraz perfect 3-0 in Grand Slam finals, and now 10-1 career in 5 sets. So he loves that big stage. Going the distance, you think about his athleticism and how physical he is. I would trust him often to not just outwill his opponents with the skill, but outlast them as well. And he certainly outlasted Sasha Zverev. And now he will try for the Channel Slam because he's going to be the defending champion when Wimbledon rolls around.
Is this channel slam really a term? I've never heard this before.
Really? Oh, you got to
Yeah.
look it up. You got to look it up.
It's not just a Ben Lewis thing, like this
No,
exists.
it's not just a Ben Lewis thing. You know what though? I maybe it's been a little bit lost in our tennis vernacular. I don't think it's been talked about nearly as much. So I'm gonna try and be a trailblazer and bring it back. But I
I'm
promise you,
gonna
it's on a Wikipedia page for you to check out. But
No, you might have created that Wikipedia page for all we know, but okay, I will look at it after we're done
yeah,
recording. For Zverev, just to stick to the tennis with Zverev,
yeah,
second Grand Slam final to compare to the first one, where I mean that first final against Team was one of the more bizarre finals I've ever seen because A, there were no fans in the stadium at the US Open,
yeah.
so super quiet in New York, which you never say those things together. And it kind of looked in that one like neither player really wanted to win in the sense that they were both kind of giving it back to each other. I wonder how Zverev will feel about this one. And I wonder at 27 years old what the future will hold for him if he will ever capture a slam or not. The talent is certainly there. I am always impressed with how for 6'6" or whatever his height is, how he moves around the court actually quite gracefully, really for that size.
Yeah.
And you wonder what the future has in store, not just for him, but even the players in his age bracket who are now sandwiched in between. You know, they've been stalled by the big three for so many years, and now they've got Sinner and Alcaraz who look like they want to grab the reins and trade majors and those big moments. It's going to be really fun to see on the men's tour where it goes from here over the next couple of years, I feel like.
Yeah, Zverev is like when I think of that generation of players, that to me is the generation with Medvedev, Tsitsipas, right? And maybe a couple others you could throw in the mix, Khachanov, but not someone who ever was really competing for Grand Slams. And Medvedev, Tsitsipas, Zverev, you looked at their peaks and you thought maybe all of them would win a Grand Slam. And shockingly, it's just Medvedev with one, though he's been to 6 Grand Slam finals. So, and he's had leads in a couple of them. So obviously he's had a number of opportunities to win more than one Grand Slam. But yeah, that's been kind of another gap of players who've been a little bit shut out and shut out often by the big three. And now this new wave, new generation, where we're having a number of players born in the 2000s winning Grand Slams, a new world number one in Jannik Sinner, and now number two Carlos Alcaraz. And we've had this conversation of a changing of the guard. I don't want to criticize Novak Djokovic. I mean, he had a phenomenal tournament, uh, all things considered, before that knee injury, and playing through a knee injury, coming through 5 sets at 3 in the morning to beat Lorenzo Musetti, overcoming a 2-1 deficit in sets and a breakdown in the fourth to beat Francisco Cerundolo. But you have to wonder at the age of 37, returning from another knee injury, Wimbledon is in doubt. He's dropped a couple spots in the rankings. It's going to be quite challenging for him to really contend, I think, for that number one spot again.
it's really shocking to me how this season has gone for Novak because last year was just so incredible for him. I mean, so dominant last year. I was at the age of 36, and what's happened this year, it's hard to explain. Now, an injury, obviously, he can't control that. I wonder if stepping out onto the grass is the best idea. It's not a surface where you really ever feel like you fully have your footing. So on a knee that's gone through some trauma, perhaps not the best surface to reemerge on, especially with the Olympics being such a priority for him. Maybe it's best to wait and just stick to the clay and then restart your preparations on that surface when you're healthy enough. And who knows the extent of the knee injury, if that will even be possible. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But it's just remarkable the change from last year to this year. And we've seen it with other players before. All of a sudden, there's been a sudden sort of dip, and it could partially be physically speaking, and also a rise in other players on the tour. But I remember last year, Yumi talked so much about him and Alcaraz and that rivalry that emerged over the course of the French Open, Wimbledon, Cincinnati, and it doesn't look like I don't even think they've played each other yet this year. So
No, they haven't.
it's kind of paused that rivalry that we knew wasn't going to have a super long shelf life, but I was certainly hoping it was going to have more than just a few months in 2023.
Yeah, and look, I'd love to see a resumption of it. I want to see those players face off against each other a few more times, and let's hope Novak can get healthy. Obviously, Wimbledon is in doubt, but as you said, Paris Olympics, huge priority. I mean, Novak has almost every trophy he could possibly ask for, except for that gold medal. That's really the only thing missing. And as you said, you have to think now coming off an injury, surgery, would you really make a sudden switch to the grass court surface, then switch right back to the clay? That feels like it could stress or harm the body at this stage of his career. So we'll see what he does. We should talk about our new world number one. I mean, Jannik Sinner. Despite losing in the semifinals here at the French Open in a very exciting 5-set match to Carlos Alcaraz, for me, he has hands down been the best player of the world in 2024.
Yeah, agreed. I can't wait to see what he's got in store next. And I feel fortunate that he kind of, I feel like ramped things up here in our city last summer in Toronto when he won the
Yep.
first Masters 1000 title of his career. And we just saw how good he could be up close. And it wasn't a one-off. He sustained it. He's carried it forward. And he's just such a likable guy too. Plus, those fans dressed up as the Carrots, they're kind of cool. So I kind of dig that in terms of, costumes from a fan base. Interesting to see how he'll do it at Wimbledon. Interesting to see how all these players recover now from the French Open, and that includes our Canadians too. And what can we expect from them on grass as we're about to make this surface change? And I had a few interviews this week on Canadian radio, and I was asked more than once, "What about the disappointment of the Canadians at the French?" And I thought, well, it's kind of interesting to me because they actually had collectively the strongest French Open that we've ever seen from the Canadians in the
Yeah.
Open era. And yet we're left wanting more because, yeah, we want another slam. We want a deep run. We want a second week showing, quarterfinals or better. We got to remind ourselves maybe we're, world champions in women's tennis right now, and we're just one season removed from doing the same with the men at the Davis Cup. We want more. We're greedy. It speaks to how far Canadian tennis has come. Maybe the grass. I feel like the grass is a better shot for us than the clay, at least with our male players.
Yeah, especially you look at the success of men's players, Canadian men's players in grass, and that has been, I think, undoubtedly our best surface on the ATP side. Obviously, Milos Raonic making that historic Wimbledon final when he did, and great news that after missing the clay season and battling some injury issues, he's back. And I'm sure this was the plan when he kind of hit the reset button on his season. Get healthy if you can for the grass, and that's exactly what he's done. Denis Shapovalov, he's someone who's a former semifinalist at Wimbledon. Felix Auger-Aliassime, I think the indoor hard court obviously is his best surface. We don't have a Grand Slam played on indoor hard court, although
Too
sometimes
bad.
you get domes, I suppose. So that can happen. But Felix, I think his game is also really suited to grass, and he's been to the quarterfinals of Wimbledon before as well. So with all that in mind, you have to think this could be a time for Canadians to kind of make a push. And then if I'm looking on the women's side, like in terms of Bianca and Layla, they just really haven't had many reps on grass, right?
It's true.
Even Bianca, I think her big season in 2019, she missed the entire grass court season, and has never had a full season of health on tour on the WTA. Leila Annie Fernandez, she's missed Wimbledon before too with injury issues, particularly after she was playing so well with a quarterfinal run at the French Open, injured that foot. She missed Wimbledon then, so she hasn't had that many reps on grass. And if we talk about maybe more veteran players, Rebecca Marino can play really well on this surface. So I think the women's side is always particularly open in terms of players, gaining experience on this surface. And to me, this is one where you kind of see sometimes more veteran players do well because they've just had more time, more seasons to adapt and know what to expect when they make that surface change.
Yeah, Leilani's never been past the second round at Wimbledon. Bianca made the third round last year. And, Bianca's kind of, it's funny because she played so well to get to the third round of the French
Yeah.
and her first tournament in 9 months, in almost 10 months, but no ranking change because she was matching what she did a year ago. So she's stuck at number 228. Wimbledon, she made round three last year. I don't know if it's realistic to expect her to go really beyond that, given the fact that, again, she doesn't have many matches under her belt. So even if she makes third round, which I would qualify as a success, her
Yeah.
ranking still isn't going to improve, unfortunately. But many years ahead for both those two players to figure it out. On the men's side, it was 2021 where Felix made the quarters and Dennis made the semis, and what a great result that was for Canada at the time. But you look at their major record since then. Dennis has played 8 slams without moving past the fourth round. Felix has played 9 now without moving past the fourth round. I feel like we're due for one of them to have that moment. God knows that Dennis's ranking could certainly use the boost. Maybe it'll be here. And for Milos, I was speaking with him earlier this week, and he said after Hertogenbosch, he's going to Wimbledon. He might have to play qualies, he said.
Okay.
He's put in for a request for a wild card, obviously. And my first inclination was like, well, gosh, how could they not give a former finalist a wild card there? But look at what the French Open just did to Dominic Thiem. So
Yeah.
nothing is guaranteed there, but obviously he'd go and play qualies if he had to. And then he says that the Olympics are still on his radar, so he'd go back to the clay, I think, just to represent his country if that works out. But Milos, if he's healthy, that's the question that since he's come back a year ago, we really haven't seen him being able to finish too many tournaments under his own steam, unfortunately. He's up against Jordan Thompson in Hertogenbosch. They played last year. Thompson put him out in the second round, I believe. So that'll be a tricky one. But boy, with that serve and experience, anything's possible from him if he can stay healthy. He could go deep in any of these tournaments. I could see him getting to the finals of a warm-up tournament, even
Yeah.
if he's able to get through it on his own terms.
Well, look, I think it was about this point last year when Milos Raonic was getting back on the court for the first time in something like, what was it, over 14 months?
It was a
And
long time.
yeah, and getting, I think, a first round win over Miomir Kekmanovic on the grass. And I think at that time, even though we did see a few match wins, we saw him get a win at Wimbledon before I remember losing to Tommy Paul. We saw his huge moment, obviously, in Toronto, beating Francis Tiafoe in the first round there on center court. You felt like still he was kind of just keeping the body together. And the end could be at any moment. And he wasn't really revealing to the press when the end was coming because I don't think he knew himself.
Well, and us included, right? We had him
Yeah,
on just before Wimbledon or just after Wimbledon, I think
yep.
just before as he was preparing to come back, and we weren't really sure what to take from it. Was it like this is a swan song? He's going to play his last couple of favorite tournaments one more time.
Hmm.
And even at the end of last year, we weren't really sure. So to see him resurface in 2024 is great, but you'd love to see him get on a little bit of a run where he can dictate things. And the body just hasn't cooperated quite yet. One other player whose body hasn't been cooperating but is returning on the grass is Gabby Dabrowski.
Yep.
Always a favorite in any slam she enters, women's or mixed doubles. Her and Aaron Routliffe, one of the best teams over the past year since they got together in Canada last summer. They'll be reunited and look out for what they can accomplish together.
Yeah, it's kind of stunning that these two together have not actually played a grass court calendar because the timing of their partnership last year and it came together really quickly, culminating in that U.S. Open title. But they haven't had a season on grass yet, so this is going to be a new experience. Nice that Gabby is healthy again. Really cool of Red Lift to team up, by the way, with Leila Annie Fernandez in Paris and play. I know they lost in the third round, but still, just to have that partnership, I think was cool. And for them to be back here. I think they're playing in Nottingham. They're going to be the top seeds. So let's see if they can get things rolling on the right foot. I was looking at a couple of these women's draws just to wrap up. Ons Jabeur, I would love to see a great grass court campaign from her. Whether or not that's winning Wimbledon this year, and I know that's a lot to ask. I think something really shifted for her in Paris. She played so well at the French Open, made the quarterfinals, had a great 3-set match with Coco Gauff. I want to see Ons back because she, to me, is one of the best women's players to watch.
I don't know if Ons is old enough yet to have her sort of Cinderella like swan song kind of moment that we've all been waiting for,
Yeah.
like a Goran Ivanisevic or Jana Novotná, who were quite a bit older when they got it. So maybe it'll come sooner for her. But she is playing some great tennis after struggling for a while. I thought the French, she looked really good there. And beat Leilani Fernandez with ease. Well, not ease, but in straight sets, which she'd never done before in her previous victories over Leila Annie. So yeah, the sentimental favorite. Hoping for a deep run. I'm just so stoked for the grass court tennis, man. Like I just absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Wimbledon, I'm gonna have to tell the fam, like I don't care where we are, what we're doing, like dad's gonna be watching TV. So it's yeah, nothing will make me miss those 2 weeks of tennis.
Yeah, our most traditional and historic Grand Slam on the calendar, just a few weeks away. Guys, thanks as always for listening to Matchpoint Canada. Thanks to Hotel X for this episode, guys. We will talk to you next time.